Hello and welcome. My name is Melissa Galasso, and today we're going to talk about the second ASU of 2024, which is ASU 2024-02, Codification Improvements. And this standard is kind of an interesting one. It came out on the last workday of March, so the weekend included the last day of the month, but the last workday, so 2 ASUs in the month of March, none in January, none in February, 2 in March. And this one is a pretty niche standard. This is part of a much bigger project. There's a long-standing agenda basically where they have the standing project. It's always open. And basically stakeholders can provide feedback on areas where the Accounting Standards Codification, the ASC, could use an update. Typically, these are going to be small adjustments that need to be made, sometimes conforming amendments, sometimes just a clarification, or what we like to call a technical correction. So minor wording changes, structure changes, etc. And anytime we have these, we call these a codification improvement. And so we kind of keep them open, and then they look at them as they go through. This codification improvement is a very specific type of codification improvement. So ASU 2024-02, which is codification improvements, amendments to remove reference to the concept statements. So as they go through this, the board gets to decide which types of projects they want to include in the codification improvement. And they decided to have one specifically focused on the concept statements themselves. And so this is just part of, incremental updates as you go through this. So we're going to look today at what is the reason for this, right? As we think about this, what's the objective? And the goal of this is to remove references, as it says in the title, to the concept statements. Now, this was proposed back in 2019. There were 3 sections to that proposed ASU. And so it was titled Codification Improvements. And so Section A were references to the concept statements. Section B and Section C, which were disclosures and other codification improvements, have already been finalized. They were issued back in 2020. But this part took a little bit longer. So they are numbered. There's a sequential set of specific references that they were looking at. And the board proposed back in 2019 to make these updates. And they did receive a number of items that were, responsive to this. And so now it did end up with some changes from the proposal to the final draft here. And so it typically resulted in a more narrow change than was originally proposed. So why do we care if the ASC has references to the concept statements? Well, first and foremost, the ASC, the codification, is authoritative guidance, right? It's our primary source of GAAP for not-for-profit and for-profit organizations, right? The FASB has the equivalent of that for governmental entities, but for not-for-profits and for-profit organizations, the codification is authoritative. Concept statements are the theory that underlie GAAP. It's basically the things that the board, right, the FASB board members think about when they write GAAP, when they issue an ASU, an accounting standard update. But concept statements themselves are not authoritative, right? So they're the theory that underlies GAAP, but it doesn't become formal GAAP. It doesn't become authoritative guidance until, as you can imagine, they issue an ASU and that's in there. And so some people were concerned that references to the concept statements could imply that that element of the concept statement was therefore authoritative. And so we want to really keep what is authoritative guidance, right? The ASUs, the codification, separate from the concept statements, which is the theory, which is the definitions, which is the understanding side. And the FASB uses them, right? The concept statements are very important. They've actually spent a lot of time focusing on the conceptual framework, updating the definition of elements, updating what qualifies for what is recognition and derecognition, right? So all of these are recent projects that the FASB has worked on. So we're not saying that the codification is not important. It has a very important value to creating consistent GAAP. The theory is if you have 7 people on the board and you replace them with 7 different people, the concept statement should give us a relatively similar outcome. We shouldn't every time we have a new board member decide an asset has a different need, right? So we want to make sure that we're giving the theory consistency on whatever project that we're working through. So this is just saying we don't want to confuse what is authoritative, which was is not authoritative. As you can imagine, it's still written in an ASU, or it's written in the codification. So in most instances, the references are extraneous and not required to understand the guidance. So they might, say it meets the definition of asset as defined in the concept statements, right? It doesn't really change, as you can imagine, the importance of what is being said within the concept statements. In other times, the references were used in prior statements to provide guidance in certain topical areas. And so what this is just trying to do is pull it all together for us, honestly, and to make sure that we go through this. Because it is just a codification improvement, it's not intended to completely change how we do any accounting, right? If it was going to be completely changing it, we wouldn't call it a codification improvement, right? Minor updates, clarifications. In this instance, we're just trying to keep what is in the codification authoritative. So what are some examples that you might see, right? So the master glossary is a great area. There's actually multiple issues in the master glossary, but the master glossary in terms of the definition of expected credit loss and expected residual returns refers to the concept statement 6 using cash flow information and present value in accounting measurement, because again, that's a key relevant element to doing your expected credit loss model, to clarify the meaning of the term expected cash flow. And so the master glossary defines the term expected cash flow as the probability weighted average, that is the mean of the distribution, of possible future cash flows. Concept statement 7, however, defines expected cash flow as the sum of probability weighted amounts in a range of possible estimated amounts, the estimated mean or average. So while worded differently, the two have very similar meaning, right? Not intended to be completely different. So therefore, the amendment in this ASU would simply remove the reference to concept statement 7 and just add a link to the master glossary for the term expected cash flow. So we don't have to have the reference to the superseding statement there. We don't have to have the detail about the expected the computations associated with the expected loss. Instead, we would have the application guidance in section 55, and we would have just the term in the master glossary, and we'll just send them to the master glossary because really that's all they need at that point. So in this scenario, instead of as described in FASB concept statement 7 using cash flow information, they have basically just around the term expected cash flow added a glossary link. So this way we don't have to worry about it. And then they sent them as a reference to illustrations in the 55 section, which is application guidance. Another example that we can see here is also from, again, the master glossary. There's lots of different examples here, but the master glossary term obligation is restricted only to topic 480, distinguishing liabilities from equity. So you're not supposed to use the term obligation, that definition, anywhere except for topic 480. And the definition states that the definition of obligation in topic 480 is different from that used in the concept statement 6. So when we think about what concept statement 6 is, topic 480 is a very unique application of the term. And it differs from the general use that's in concept statement 6. Now, it is very clear that the definition is restricted to items in the scope of topic 480. So we really don't need a reference back to any other definition of the term obligation, including the definition provided in statement 6, because it doesn't even apply. And so in this scenario, they would remove that reference back to concept statement 6. We don't need to remind people that's different. We already know it's restricted specifically to this particular topic. Now, they had a couple of options here because these are codification improvements. Sometimes they just make them effective upon issuance because they're not making big changes. In this scenario, they're just removing, references to elsewhere, but not trying to change the intended guidance. However, they have decided that sometimes people just want to make sure they're taking a close look at this. So they have provided effective dates and transition guidance. Sometimes they have not in the past, so this is a little bit unique. And so this is effective for public business entities for fiscal years beginning after December 15th, 2024, and for everyone else effective for fiscal years beginning after December 15th, 2025. As always, early application is permitted for any fiscal year or interim period for which financial statements have not yet been issued or made available to be issued, because again, it's not really going to change how you get your answer in these scenarios. All right, so that's a wrap on our second ASU of the year. Any guesses on how many ASUs we'll get to by the end of 2024? Let us know. Shoot me an email with your guess, and we'll see how close you are when we get to that December 31st deadline and see how close you were. All right, that's a wrap. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you on a future Nano Learning. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.